So the cerebellum's at the back here doing its thing. It does pattern crunching really well. And just in front of it, and sort of fairly loosely connected, but nevertheless connected, are a bunch of little sort of brain organelles that we collectively call the basal ganglia. And they each do like a little bit of a thing. A good metaphor to understand this is if you know computers, your cerebellum is a little bit like a GPU, and a GPU in a computer crunches numbers. It just does maths, like really fast. Your cerebellum crunches patterns. It takes complex patterns in, it basically crunches them, and it comes out with a simplified, smoothed pattern that it then tells the rest of the brain to sort of do and enact. The basal ganglia, which is a little bit in front of that, that's like a controller, like a GPU controller in a computer that decides when to kick off the GPU, or in this case, the basal ganglia is basically working out when there's a pattern worth saving and when it's worth triggering a pattern that we know. The cerebellum seems to be the bit that does the actual crunching of the pattern, but the basal ganglia seems to be the bit that decides whether or not to trigger it. I mean, we didn't know this until quite recently. We thought they were completely separate, but basically the research at the moment is suggesting that they kind of work in tandem. They're both connected massively to the rest of the brain in the, what we might call the CPU in computer terms, but they work together. So if you've got ADHD with dopamine struggles, that mostly affects the basal ganglia at the front, the controller, and that means that the controller finds it difficult to decide whether or not to trigger this pattern process, this pattern crunching process, or it doesn't quite recognize that there's something that needs to be triggered. If you've got struggles with the cerebellum, then that's a struggle with crunching the pattern itself, or a different way of crunching the pattern. So these two things need to work together, and if either of them is affected, the whole process is affected. So neurodiversity is like something in that whole mix is going squiffy. If you've got loads of basal ganglia stuff, that seems to be more correlated with the ADHD label. If your cerebellum's got more of the deficits, that seems to be correlated with more of the ASD label, like the autism label. And if you've got both going on, then you might be a bit ADHD. That's kind of where the research is pointing me. There's loads of other stuff going on in the neuroscience, but that seems to be in the mix.